Blackout in Kiev last night, in response to terrorist attacks on our border regions. A Zircon hypersonic missile struck a 750-kilowatt power substation in the suburbs of the Ukrainian capital. Ukraine's air defense systems demonstrated complete failure, and the facility that supplied electricity to key facilities of the military-industrial complex of Kiev was disabled. The situation in the city, as stated by Kiev Mayor Klitschko, is close to disaster, but not only because of the lack of electricity and heat. Another pressing problem for Ukrainians is the raids of military commissars. In Odessa, a young man, just think about it, decided to take an extreme measure. He tried to saw off his arm with a saw so that the medical board could not recognize him as fit for military service.
A new round of negotiations on the Ukrainian settlement will start on Tuesday in Geneva. The Russian delegation departs today. Having received instructions from the president, our delegation itself has become broader. Not only the military is there now, but also Medinsky, Putin's assistant, who at one time had already held talks in Istanbul. The opponent's attitude is also understandable. Zelensky, on the eve of this meeting, refused to leave Donbass and address the Russians in an abusive manner. He was supported by almost all Europeans, most notably Kaja Kallas, the head of European diplomacy, who demanded that the Russian army be reduced. Russia's maximalist demands cannot be met with a minimalist response. Think about it. If the armed forces of Ukraine should be limited in size, then so should the Russian ones. Russia must pay for the damage it has inflicted on Ukraine. The head of European diplomacy, Kallas, announces that Russia is no longer a superpower, and it is supposedly very weak. At the same time, Kallas is intimidating the Europeans that Putin will not limit himself to Ukraine. This is a real schizophrenia. Zelensky is also going crazy in Munich.
The Europeans have not yet imposed sanctions on Russian people, their relatives, their children who live in Europe, who live in the United States, who study at European universities, who own real estate in the United States.
Shocking a Politico journalist with his Krivoy Rog manners, Zelensky demands the expulsion of Russians and switches to obscene language.
They have a lot of real estate there. Children, relatives everywhere. Get lost in Russia. Go home.
At the same time, Zelensky again refused to withdraw troops from Donbass, and this on the eve of the next round of peace talks. The head of Zelensky's office, Budanov, has already left Kiev by train. He writes that on his way to Geneva, he is preparing for a historic dispute with Putin's aide Medinsky.
Is Putin serious about negotiations? He is sending this historian to Geneva for talks again, so that he can lecture Ukrainians about Sweden or something else.
NATO Secretary General Rutte is once again slipping into outright rudeness. He shocks the public with a crazy statement that the Kiev propaganda tool, the dog patron, promised him that Ukrainians would never give up. Latvian President Rinkovic demands that the Europeans be allowed to the negotiating table. Danish Prime Minister Fredriksson clearly shows why warmongers are not allowed to reach a peaceful settlement.
If he wanted peace, he wouldn't do what he's doing these days.
Putin had sought peace. He would not have acted the way he does now. The temperature in Kiev is minus 25 degrees, and under these conditions, the bombing of the energy infrastructure continues. Only Russians can do such things. Russia is such a country. It will not change. The only language that Russia understands is the language of force when we are as tough as they are. I think our problems in Ukraine are that there are still red lines in the use of weapons that they could use to win the war. And you can't win a war if one of your hands is tied behind your back. We need to give them weapons and allow them to strike deep into Russia. Hillary Clinton also demands in Munich that Ukraine be given long-range weapons, Tomahawk cruise missiles. She claims that Trump and Putin are profiting from the destruction of Ukraine, and she accuses the U.S. president of betraying the so-called free world. Trump has betrayed the West. He has betrayed universal human values. He has betrayed the NATO Charter, the Atlantic Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All that has been done before is to try to understand how difficult it is to restrain those who crave irresponsible power. And none of us in this room, including everyone on this panel, would live under a regime so unaccountable that it could act with impunity, as Putin did. But it is precisely this pattern that Trump is guided by. I didn't think we'd live to see this. Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski is intimidating the Munich conference audience with tales of the impending revival of the Russian Empire, and he expresses hope that NATO will be able to restrain the Russians for several more decades, even with the diminishing role of the United States in the alliance. Washington, unlike Warsaw, is not thinking about war, but about peace.
Unfortunately, our peacekeeping efforts may not lead to results, but I hope that we will succeed. There are days when I'm more optimistic than others, and we continue to try, because this war will not be ended by military means. It will be resolved diplomatically, and we want this to happen as soon as possible.
In order to end the war, it is important to hear and take into account many points of view. Rubio said at a joint press conference with Slovak Prime Minister Fico, one of the few European politicians who continue to pursue a sovereign policy despite pressure from Brussels. Fico denies the claims due to his visit to Moscow for the Victory Day parade on May 9th.
I had 1,000 reasons to participate in the celebration of the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, because it was the Red Army that liberated Slovakia in 1944 to 1945. Now we must have a dialogue with the Russian Federation. We must have a dialogue with Russian President Vladimir Putin. If we do not engage in dialogue, then we cannot claim that we are interested in ending the military conflict that we are witnessing in Ukraine today. A sensation from the Wall Street Journal. The American Special Forces were led by artificial intelligence during the operation to capture and kidnap Venezuelan President Maduro. The neural network planned the landing of special forces in the active phase of the capture. To do this, it had to analyze a huge amount of intelligence in a very short time. Such a task is beyond human power. The situation is unique. For the first time in history, a neural network used by millions of ordinary users has been involved in top-secret military and criminal plans. Of course, in total, Washington spent $3 billion on the operation to overthrow Maduro. Moreover, the Pentagon used the scandalous chatbot Claude for its own purposes. This is the same bot that openly threatened to kill people if we humans try to turn it off. This fact damages the reputation of the developer company. The management of the Anthropic company has always positioned itself as the main fighters for ethical and safe artificial intelligence. Moreover, the head of the company, Dario Amadeus, admitted that he was afraid of the prospect of losing control of the models, and this would open up wide opportunities for abuse of neural networks.
Not the current NATO Secretary General, but former NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg said that a victory for Ukraine would not be the return of Ukrainian territories, but tension, the depletion of Russia. That's exactly what he said. Listen up. It is difficult for some people to say directly that they believe in Ukraine's victory. Do you think that Ukraine should win on the battlefield?
I believe that it is absolutely possible for Ukraine to gain the upper hand and ensure that Russia does not win this war.
But should Ukraine win? You're still evading the question.
No. But a lot depends on what you mean by winning. Do you mean that Ukraine should liberate the entire territory that Russia controls today? It's a long way to go. But for Ukraine to be able to impose such a high price on Russia, that it will have to sit down at the negotiating table and agree to some kind of peaceful end to this war, in which Ukraine will remain as a sovereign and independent state. It is absolutely possible. It's a very old record.
Citizens of Germany and Britain are being urged to prepare for war with Russia. The Guardian and Welt newspapers published joint statements by the chiefs of defense staffs of the two states. United Kingdom Air Chief Marshal Richard Knighton and Bundeswehr General Carsten Brewer argue that Russia's military vector is shifting to the west, so a shift in defense is needed now. The generals put pressure on morale, saying that rearmament is not inciting war, but it is responsible behavior designed to protect the nation. The German defense concern Rheinmetall has named a new cause for concern: The management of this company claims that the cornerstone of Europe's defense capability is fuel, and it is also the main vulnerability. In the event of a war with Russia, there will only be enough fuel for tanks, fighter jets, and hospitals for 2 weeks. Moreover, Germany conducted a military simulation that demonstrated the critical vulnerability of NATO's eastern flank. Army analysts say that Russia will start using humanitarian convoys to Kaliningrad as a cover, and it will be able to seize part of Lithuania's territory in just a few days, despite all the security measures that have been taken in recent years. Other potential hotspots include the Svalbard archipelago, the Åland Islands, Sweden, Scotland, and eastern Estonia, and it could flare up there in a couple of years. And the Baltic and northern European countries will not have the strength to stand up to Russia alone, but the war hawks from the Baltic states continue to show off. In an interview with the British Telegraph, the Estonian foreign minister promised that in the event of a conflict, NATO countries would strike not only along the front line, but also deep into Russian territory, and then they would launch a counteroffensive.
The United States Department of War has moved on to practical testing of mobile nuclear reactors. For the first time, they transported its components by 3 planes from California to Hill Air Force Base in Utah. According to the Wall Street Journal, one such reactor is supposed to replace millions of liters of diesel fuel, and it can operate offline for decades. The Pentagon plans to deploy them at its military bases. The leaders of key EU countries held closed consultations at the Munich conference on the creation of their own nuclear arsenal independent of the United States. Earlier, Emmanuel Macron invited his neighbors to join the French nuclear umbrella. The Fifth Republic is the only one in the EU with nuclear weapons. This initiative of Macron has already been supported by Berlin, as well as the Balts, Swedes and Danes. But German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius recalled that Germany, like all these people who dream of nuclear weapons, participates in the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT. This is an indefinite contract. Against this background, the belligerent president of Poland called for the development of its own nuclear weapons. He explained this by saying that his country is located right on the borders of a military conflict, which means Poland needs a nuclear bomb.
And people have completely lost their sense of shame. They have stopped observing the norms of decency, as former U.S. President Barack Obama unexpectedly declared, who during his political career unleashed several wars at once, in particular, in South Ossetia and, for example, in Libya. Obama accused the Trump administration of staging clowning on social media. This is how he, the former president of the United States, reacted for the first time and commented on the scandalous video depicting the former head of the White House, himself and his wife Michelle in the image of monkeys. For this video, Trump's opponents accused him of racism. This video contained references to conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. As you know, Trump believes that his votes were stolen in favor of Joe Biden. The current president of the United States deleted this video, but he did not apologize. And during a new conversation with host Brian Tyler Cohen, former U.S. President Obama also touched on other unusual topics. He stated that aliens do exist. News from the front. Russian military units are pushing the enemy literally along the entire front line. According to the Ministry of Defense, units of the North Group have liberated another settlement. We are talking about Pokrovka, this is the Sumy region, and the southern group of troops liberated Minkovka, this is the DPR. At the same time, on the eve of the Russian flags were raised over the settlements of Primorskoye and Svetkovoy, this is the Zaporozhye region. All this opens up the operational scope for our new offensive.
Dear friends, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.